Hey, what is up everybody? Platform Disciple here, continuing our review of the new Rebellion set, but before we get into anything, I have to talk about a couple changes that were made to the new card. Two new cards. There's the Biginator, no longer gets +3/+3, he gets +2/+2, and he only receives the buff while deployed. This is a colossal nerf to the card. I still think it's playable in spite of that, but to put it in perspective, before it was getting +3/+3 and didn't need to be deployed. I think it's still playable. I definitely think it's still playable in the 2 Genesis 1 Warpath deck that tries to win with Hakim. I don't know if we're going to be seeing any 1 Logarithmatron 2 Biginators in the command zone anymore. If we are, it's definitely going to be a much weaker deck than it was over the past few days. And the other big change that we had was to Painstone, which I seriously underestimated. I continued testing all the new cards after I had uploaded the Veror review, and I was really surprised at how brutal the card Painstone was. It used to be 4, it used to be 1 purity. Now it costs 5 and it's 2 purity, which does a few things that are extremely noteworthy. Of course, it costing more is just a straight up nerf, but in addition to that, the 2 purity means you can no longer use Tibat with the card, which was the main problem. The reason that I assumed that Painstone was not going to be good was because I assumed that the previous version of the Tibat deck, the one that used Descendants of the Dragons, Exiles, and Sleepers, was the better version. But as it turns out, cutting Sleepers for Veror and putting in Painstone was distinctly more powerful, especially since Veror brought some other tools, including the new card Acquire, which is very abusable for the Tibat style deck because it gives it a win con in addition to drawing it cards. So yeah, anyways, the other thing about Painstone, it was pointed out to me in the comments section of my videos by a user named Noir, or Noir, I don't know, Norre, and he pointed out, or she, I don't know technically, that the Rampant Virus card comboed very, very well with Painstone, and I did test it, and it was insanely powerful to be able to do something that was almost like a low orbit ion cannon every single turn. And there were a few other Sleepers cards that were pretty good with it, notably Acid Rain was really strong, because that basically meant everything that your opponent had was going to die really quickly. But you can't do that anymore, and you're not going to be seeing Tibat and Painstone. As a matter of fact, I think Painstone is phenomenally weak now. So, I don't know. But let's get into the core portion of the video, talking about the new Flame Dawn cards. And right off the bat, we have Cowardly Recruit, a card that we've already seen before, and my opinion of it has not changed, which is that the card is amazingly strong, that any Flame Dawn aggro deck is gonna be very, very likely to use this card because of its stats. It also has a low morale cost, which is just bonus, and you're almost never gonna be able to run into the situation of it not being able to attack when you're in a Flame Dawn deck, because you're going to have tons of characters, and even if you play it as your 1-drop, most of your 2-drops are going to have charge. Moving on, Defiant Footman, another card we've seen before. My opinion of it, once again, hasn't changed much. It has some unique combos with cards like Alita Immortal Sufferer. Just bring that up real quick. Oh yeah, I've got the Rebellion set filter on. Alita Immortal Sufferer and Intimidating Rally are both cards that come to mind. There we go. Both cards that come into mind when looking at the Defiant Footman. But that being said, playing Defiant Footman in your deck means that you'll frequently run into scenarios where you lose tempo because it doesn't have charge and its stats aren't good enough to make up for the fact that it doesn't have charge. So I don't know whether the card will be played or not. It has some potential, but it definitely, as of now, doesn't beat out something like Paladin of the Flame Dawn or something like that. All right. Duke Rushington the third. I haven't tested him yet. We already looked at him in one of my previous videos, and my opinion hasn't changed. He dodges removal very well, but the problem is it's very, very, very easy for your opponent to kill him with combat damage because he moves to the front of the assault zone, which means if they have any defenders, Duke Rushington is going to connect with that defender, and he's got such low health that he's probably going to die. Admittedly, he is going to get one attack in, because he basically has charge where your opponent doesn't know he's coming. So we'll have to wait and see. Morningstar Accelerator, another card we've seen before. The stats are crazy. I think it's definitely good in Rift Run, but I don't know if it makes it a constructed, because Cavalry Paladin fits the same slot and does more or less the same thing. The difference is Cavalry Paladin does a lot less damage and has less health, but the Cavalry Paladin doesn't have to be overcharged, and Cavalry Paladin is immune to a lot of forms of removal, so it's a tough call. And you can't have that many 5-drops in a 2 Flame Dawn deck, 2 Flame Dawn or 3 Flame Dawn. All right, next, Morningstar Wave Clearer. He's 6 cost. His stats are really poor for his cost. And if you remove him from the game, the next character you play has charge, but it's not worth it, I don't think. I mean, admittedly, you get this effect in 1 Flame Dawn Purity, but I think that Ferocity is, for the most part, just going to be better at giving a character charge or something that resembles charge. We also have, just got to find him real quick. Herald of Dawn gives characters charge. It's 2 Purity, which is potentially a problem for certain decks, but I don't know. And then there's one more, Fiery Ascension, which is also 2 Purity. That's another one of the new cards, but we'll talk about it when we get to it. So yeah, I think Morningstar Wave Clearer is really weak, and I don't even think it's very good in Rift Run because being able to remove it is almost impossible in Rift Run to rely on, and its stats just aren't good. All right, Rapier Fanatic. I mean, it clearly hits insanely hard, and then it dies. So you have to be playing pretty much an all or nothing deck to make this card relevant. To be fair, it is Flame Dawn, so Flame Dawn is already kind of in that situation. So if you're playing a deck that just wants to push for damage like all the time really fast, it's okay, because if it gets through and does 14, that's very, very good, even if it dies. If it doesn't get through, it's really bad generally, but it can actually clear Defender. So I think the card has a lot of potential. I'm not currently using it, but it's not a bad card. Okay, next we have Sin, the Hope of Dawn, and I think this card is one of the ones that has the most potential out of the new Flame Dawn cards. I'm using it as a 3 of in my deck, and the reason is that I think the stats are solid and the effect is very potent. It resembles Warpath's Agent Coil. Once again, we gotta clear that. Where if you choose correctly, Agent Coil just completely kills the character, which is really, really good. And using Agent Coil Primal Hunter enough has convinced me that Sin is probably very good. Because he doesn't have quite as powerful effect as the Agent Coil, but given that he's a 2 cost and he has a very similar effect, I think it's definitely good. Because from turn 2 to turn 3, there's a decent chance that Sin trades with the character evenly, or not evenly, in his favor, because he prevents the damage. And later on, it puts a dent into a defender without Sin dying. So both of those are just good. Okay, next we have Tailored Knight. I honestly think this card's garbage. I mean, 15-7 with shield 1 is not actually that bad, but you have to be playing Genesis, you have to overcharge a card, and then you also need to keep in mind that in Flame Dawn, you have access to Cavalry Paladin, who has shield 1 billion at the same purity, 1 purity, and has comparable stats. Admittedly, he costs 1 more, but he has charge. You don't have to overcharge anything. So I don't know. So yeah, that's my opinion of Tailored Knight. I don't think it sees any constructed play. It might be okay in Rift Run, but having very low health in Rift Run on a 4-drop that doesn't immediately impact the game is pretty bad. All right, Tulio. We've already seen him before. I've tested him. I think he has applications in some combo decks. He's very fun. And my initial impression of him has changed. I thought that Tulio was going to be in a tier 1, tier 2 deck. Now my impression is that he's definitely not tier 1 material, because he's too fragile of a combo to rely on. If he gets blasted, then you're screwed. But I think he's very cool, very fun. And there are a lot of decks that you can build around him, and even if he's not tier 1, he's still very cool. Okay, next we have Bombard, and this card I think is extremely powerful, because Flame Dawn Commando has a very similar effect. Flame Dawn Commando is very powerful. This is also very similar to Lightning Blast in Veror. Being able to do 4 damage at the cost of 1 is very important early on for killing some high priority targets, including but not limited to Chlor is one of them. There's also brand new Raziel is another one that's very important to kill early. And there's plenty more cards that are worth killing early with that. And it also helps even in the later portion of the game. You can finish off a character, kill a character, but if your opponent gets low enough, you can even force some extra damage in. Being able to fall back on Bombard as a way to finish your opponent when they've stabilized can be pretty effective. All right. Fiery Ascension, as of now, I have not seen it been played. I don't know what the application of the card is. I think that's the key thing, is you need to figure out what character is worth spending 3 and letting your opponent know that you're playing, because it says at the next turn, which means your opponent is fully aware that you're putting something into the assault zone with flying. So it's very telegraphed. The question is, what card is worth doing that with? And as of now, I don't know. If somebody can figure it out, then maybe the card will be good. But until then, I have very low expectations for this card. All right. Next, Glory of the Empire. And this card is one that I'm not quite sure about. I was testing it. And when it happened, like when I got the buff on 2 or 3 characters, it was extremely powerful. But sometimes I didn't feel like I could get the buff on characters. And other times when I could get the buffs on the characters, it felt like that was an indicator that I was going to win the game anyways. So I've actually cut it from my deck for now. I do think it does have some potential. It's also 1 purity, so you can put it in a token deck, which is very good. So I think it's okay, but I don't know if it's actually like a must-have card. So we'll have to wait and see. Next up, Red Tape, and I think this card is insanely good. I don't know if it's quite like overpowered. I initially thought that this was the strongest card in the set, but my opinion has changed around a little since I've seen some other cards in action. But I do think this card is extremely powerful. Your opponent loses a lot of tempo when you play this card. It can also target the support zone, which is very important. It can be enough to lock an opponent out of the game for long enough that you kill them by turn 5, which is the dream for triple Flamed On, really. And I'm also going to throw it out there, although I don't think this is it almost never is going to be the time what you're using it for, but you can use it on your own Sackless to get another Sackless proc by putting them back in the command zone and then playing them again. That's sort of like a very, very niche thing, but it is worth thinking about because it is an option on the card. So yeah, very, 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 very strong. I don't know if it's overpowered, but it's sometimes just better than Exhaust. It costs less than Exhaust. And then it's also much more powerful than Stumble, but it costs 1 more. So it's a similar effect is what I'm saying, but it's a very strong effect, and it's definitely aggressively costed. And the last card we have is the Strength of Unity, which is 4 cost, and the effect is insanely, insanely powerful. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking that this may have been the developer team's answer to Tibat, the Tibat style decks, because the Strength of Unity, provided that your characters survive, or at least one character survives, kind of negates the effect of things like Spontaneous Combustion and Tibat, which is very important. One thing that's worth noting, though, is that it doesn't have preemptive. So if your characters get wiped out before this card is played, you get nothing, which is bad. But you know, the other thing that is worth noting is that it has 1 Descendants of the Dragon's Purity, and that's a very, very difficult faction to make aggressive, in my opinion. And this card, I think, is definitely intended to be aggressive. So although the card's very, very, very strong, the question is whether these factions working together are strong enough to actually make use of the card. And that's all we have for today, and in the next video we will be going over Descendants of the Dragons.